to the next space from a panel that will be held titled Developing the Resilience of Educational Systems eh, of the Early Childhood Challenges and Opportunities in the Region. If we understand the resilience, the capacity of the systems to react and adapt to interruptions or crises, keeping its function of guaranteeing the right to education. Resilience to mobilization, to climate change, to pandemics, and many others kinds of resiliences. We may suffer as an opening. We will we have a message that we want to show you from the Minister of Education of Haiti with some words about resilience. Dear colleagues of education, allow me to say hello in this meeting, in this interchange system for America and the Caribbean. A while ago, that we have this in the region and particularly in Haiti, we are facing challenges, very big challenges. I want to tell you, I want to thank the government of Guatemala for having received us and our partners of CNDI, SUMA, and OSCA for their involvement in favor of the education, equitable and inclusive. In Haiti, the resilience of the educational system is understood by the capacity of guaranteeing continuity and following the efforts, even with catastrophes and instability and lack of safety. This resilience is vital because school is the only place where we find safety for Haitian children. The problems are many, but those more essential are insecurity that threatens with closing schools, massive displacing of children to excluded zones, natural catastrophes that destroy schools, lack of financing resources and human resources to quickly answer to those emergencies, the difficulty to have utensils, mostly for rural areas. We have to enforce resilience. We need to invest by diversing the methods of learning, such as radio, numeric support, print, pages, mobilize communities in order to make education always accessible, even with adversity. To confront this crisis, we've created many methods, concrete methods, such as diffusion of educational contents through radio and TV in Creole to reach those children in the isolated areas, print copies and pedagogical kits, illustrated alphabets, ludic materials, and deliver this to the displaced families who live in complicated access areas, create learning spaces in communities, many times in churches or community centers, who are used by volunteers. Also, a psychosocial support for children because many of them reach school with traumas, mobilization of families with simple messages, singing with your children, tell them a story, observe his environment. Also, unique school books with fundamental classes from first to fourth year in Creole to guarantee a pedagogical coherence and ease the cost of these materials. This is closing the gap to preserve the ties to learning and children even when they're in extreme situations. Today, the biggest opportunity that you give us is the one of working with the early childhood, basic education in the region. We have to work with basic education of the children as the base, giving them resources and policies dedicated to develop institutional mechanisms of continuity for education at each school so that each school can confront these crises and have a physical support too. We have to enforce psychosocial support for the children because mental health is the basis of all learning. To create a regional fund of answering for educations capable of mobilizing resources from the first hour to when a crisis strikes. We need to articulate a world of colleges, government, and the community to share innovation, adapted curricula, and pedagogical protocols. Build methods of follow up that are trustworthy and continuous, where teachers can ensure an equitable financing and prioritize vulnerable children in rural areas confronting crisis. We can act together with cooperation and regional stability to combat and have a resilient system for the children in the country. In conclusion, in Haiti, the school is a big problem, but it's a space of hope. Even if everything fails around it, we're not asking for charity, we just need a cooperation. We're ready to experiment, to learn from our brothers from Latin America and the Caribbean, and also share with the support of the GPE of SUMA, USCO, and our partners. We have a historical opportunity to transform the educational system starting from the base of the early childhood. Thanks for your attention and keep on with this huge effort for education. Thanks. Like the minister was saying, school is a safe place for children. So when a school closes, there's a very negative impact for all these children. And that's why we will speak about educational resilience, how to have this continuity no matter what's happening, topics of danger, mobility, and so on. And to discuss this exactly, we will call our next panelists that will join us here. And I invite them to come up to the stage. Santiago Cueto, main investigator from Grade. An applause for Santiago. Rocío Oliver, consultant and leader of the University del Valle in Guatemala. Hervé Boursiquot, General Director of the National Office of Cooperation of Education in Haiti, and Curtis King, Minister of Education and Reconciliation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And to moderate this panel, we invite Lisa Sargusing, Technical Specialist Senior of the OACO. An applause for Lisa too, and our panelists.
Testing. Oh, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I think Honorable Minister of Haiti has actually set the tone for us. And with the panelists who are here, we will be getting their perspectives on that very interesting topic. And also, we do have another representative from Haiti who will perhaps expound a bit on what the minister has said, perhaps give us some of his own examples as we explore the theme of resilience. So thank you so much for taking up the offer to be on the panel. We have 3 rounds. In the first round, you will all answer the same question on challenges. The second round, there will be a question specific to the work that you are leading on. And in the third round, we will all answer the same question as it pertains to opportunities as we try to strengthen our education systems. So, just to say that when we speak of resilience in the education system, it's really about making it very adaptive and future ready so that our students can continue to learn even when there is a crisis. So, of course, I'm going to open the floor to anybody who would like to just break the ice as we look at the very first question, panelists. What exactly are the challenges or barriers that prevent the development of resilient education systems in our territories? What are the challenges? What are the barriers?
I will speak, he'll speak in Spanish. I wanted to start. I'm working at a project of educational resilience. I'll tell you about it. Where does the word come from? Comes from the Latin, means to go back, to jump or bounce. And we use it, we've been using it for a couple of 100 years, linked to physics. So a material is resilient when it is capable of recovering its initial shape or state after suffering any kind of stress or trauma. That's interesting in order to understand the evolution of this name that started to being used some 50 years ago in clinical psychology, because we found that some persons who lived in stressful environments, even according to mental health, maintained their health, their sanity. And the question was why. So psychologists started to look at this fact maybe by the middle of the 70s, and from there we started to see that it was not just a capacity of some persons, but it had to do with the environment they were in. So it's not just persons who are resilient, it's persons who are resilient in environments who are resilient. So from the psychology we learn, and it jumps to education. And yes, we talked about it, the evolution of the term. It's not only individuals, but also educational systems can be resilient. And I found a definition in a text, recent text, that says that the capacity of an educational system that's resilient allows it to absorb, resist, and adapt to alterations, while it ensures continuity in their function, in their vital functions. There are a couple of interesting things there. Alterations, right? Alterations of every kind. Maybe we'll explore that even further. And second is the vital functions. What are the vital functions of an educational system? We could say the first one is that the service continues being offered, not only present service, but all like we saw during the pandemic. But like the presentation we saw yesterday from Nini, it's not enough to go, to attend, to register for school. We need to learn. So I say that vital functions relates not only to assistance, presence, or exchange between school and students, also learning procedures that adjust to a curriculum.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Testing, testing again. Are you hearing me? No? Okay. Thanks so much. I think that definition was a very important one because sometimes we hear the word all the time and we don't, I mean, there are so many synonyms related to it. And I think one of the key things coming out is really the word of continuity. So thanks for sharing that. Rocío?
Gracias. Ahora,
Thanks. In regards to the definition that you just told us, it's important to see that this structural faculty goes a little bit beyond. It has to do with the fact that it's not a, to something we do on a whim, it's something that can be modified. It's not only not improvised, it's not just the emergency, the structure needs spaces where we have and where we work, and it has to do with the capacity of innovation and learning of the system itself, and this is only capable from structural factors, economic factors, social factors that we're seeing, where we take into considerations inequality, diversity, changes, and this allows us in an exchange to be able to learn from practices that are happening in other spaces, similar ones, but with the diversity and the difference that we have within Latin America, and that allow us to see how we will work from this sustainability of the system to be able to produce some of the spaces in projects that allow this exchange between communities, taking into consideration the context where we will be working. If we consider this context, we will look for participation of the community. We will integrate also some of the facilitators and the members to speak the same language, to work from this base of innovation. It is also important that they are centered in the student, his or her needs, what they require, what the schools require, and also another actor are the teachers, what they need, how we will work, how we incorporate them in all this. Now, these programs that we have of community participation are also reflected on the results that require for spaces to integrate other organizations that can support us.
Thanks,
gracias.
Rocío. Thank you also for raising the point of community participation, as it's really key in the whole picture of ensuring that things go right back in place in times of crisis. I'm certain at some point we will get to expound on that a little more. Hervé, la même question.
After everything I have heard, I would like to answer and say that resilience is the way to answer, where we have a student and the teacher and also the school director, and I want to explain that it is important to understand this concept that circles around education, the reality, and we often forget that we need to do all this to ensure that the child who goes to school and how these actors are going to interact and work together to ensure that the teacher teaches well and that the student learns. The Haitian context is very complex by now. We are trying to say at the capital city we have gangs, and in the country they have a lot of questions, and the story of strikes, and there are also students who are not affected by gangs but the teacher don't arrive at the school. Sometimes we have rain, we have infrastructural problems, natural catastrophes. So we have many situations that explain that even if we don't have gangs, we have other problems. What do we need to do? We have to act quickly to know what the student needs. We form the teachers, but when we advance, we have this need to act fast, and we need to make sure that each actor can play his or her role. But when we speak of resilience, it's only about students. When we have an earthquake, we speak also about teachers because the children have a house, the teachers and the director has no home either. So we work with this psychosocial topic. We think of the students, and sometimes we forget other actors, such as the teachers. I think that the context of technical things is important to ensure that we need to act urgently and work, and this demands that we better understand why the school exists and why students exist, and to place them in a better situation. We don't have the best solutions always. We need to stop and understand the context. We need to work on this context to have the students learn. It's not always easy.
Quickly, fast, and urgently. Okay? And that is key as we talk about resilience. Things must be in place so that we can be on the ball, moving. And I heard you reference all the different actors. So it is really a very comprehensive undertaking as we try to strengthen our system. So thanks for sharing that Haitian experience. I know there is more that you will be sharing with us as we continue to discuss. Honorable King?
Thank you very much. And thanks very much for the definition. Makes my work easier. But resilience and Caribbean, synonymous. And I can safely say resilience is built into our Caribbean people's DNA. And I say this because when we put into context where we live in this Caribbean region, especially those of us who occupied the small island developing states, we are said to be living in a zone that is second prone, the second most exposed zone to hazards. And as such, every single year, we have to be dealing with issues that brings out our resilience. I must say also that recently, the world faced a pandemic. And for many, that was the first time they were understanding the difficulties that Caribbean people face, because, like the rest of the world, our resilience had to come to the forefront during that period. So in the context of the Caribbean, we have a lot to learn, but we also have a lot to share from our own experiences with disasters and crises. In terms of our education system, I would say because of our experiences, we have, in many respects, developed a fairly robust and resilient education system. And in the case of early childhood education, we basically had no choice but to do so, because early childhood education for us is not just an education imperative. It is also an economic necessity, and above everything else, a right. And as such, we use that sort of philosophy to guide us whenever we are faced with these challenges. I want quickly then to point out a couple other things in terms of some of the challenges and barriers to the development of our resilient education system. In the Caribbean context, our public buildings are used as shelters. And in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, all of our public buildings are used as emergency shelters with regards to whenever we are confronted with a hurricane, which is seasonal. And sometimes we talk about hurricane, but even the storms of lesser power also destroy a lot of our environment and physical infrastructure. We also have earthquakes. And in the case of us in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we were faced right after the pandemic in 2020 with a volcanic eruption. In fact, from 2020 to now, we have faced 4 major disasters. Pandemic, that is the COVID-19 pandemic, the volcanic eruption, Hurricane Elsa, and a Category 4 Hurricane Beryl. So that you see the challenges that confront us, and more so when we have to use our schools as shelters. So that it is always very important for us to address the whole issue of continuity whenever we are faced with these disasters. And really and truly, as I have said, I believe our experiences have allowed us to develop a roadmap that serves us in good stead when we are confronted with these issues. Of course, I'll share more as we go on.
Thanks so much. I think the applause, I'm not sure if it's about everything or the roadmap that some people may want from you, Honorable King, but that is an important thing to have ready. So as Hervé says, that we can act swiftly and urgently. So far, we're realizing that resilience is related to a number of shocks that we have to respond to, as well as other types of disruptions. Hervé, you made a reference to even perhaps the type of violence that one experiences, again, causing disruptions to our school system. So let us think of it, yes, in some of the islands, it may be more as a result of climate change, the natural disasters, and so forth, but there are other realities, as in Haiti and in other places, that affect the continuity of learning in our region. So I think you've done very well in completing the first round, and at this point, we are going to ask you some specific questions. In your case, Santiago, we know that you are working on Adapt Ed. Unfortunately, yesterday we missed your presentation, but you have an opportunity now to tell us what ideas and practices have been identified regarding the resilience of education systems in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you. Yes. Outside, there's the poster, and perhaps we can discuss it later, if the afternoon allows us. Yes, we started a project that's called Adapted. We started by revising literature, everything that's been written, and we've interviewed some actors. But I'm here so you know me, and if I write you an email, please answer, because I'd like to talk to many of you about the interesting things you're doing. I agree very much with Curtis King, with how much we need to learn about what's been said here. One of the things we found is that when you speak about resilience and interruption of educational systems, you think about climate change. And from there, natural disasters, which affect, of course, the continuity of the service. But there are other linked. Of course, pandemic put us head up. Javier presented some numbers about the number of weeks that we interrupted school. But if you think about not pandemics, epidemics, health problems, they have worked from, they have happened many times. Sometimes not just a region, sometimes it's an individual, but it's a topic that we need to discuss. A third one that we found is migration. In this case, we are seeing it with colleagues of Venezuela, but as we said yesterday, there's migration from other countries. A fourth topic that leads to this interruption is also the violence and all these patterns of gangs, however you call it. And finally, political and economical crisis that sometimes lead to problems in budgets and things that interrupt the services. It's five that I find, but perhaps you can think of others. But they're not completely disconnected from one from another. This is something we realize right away. A quick example. A group that migrates settles in one zone that is not considered safe, then we have flooding, then we require services. It's migration, it's a disaster, it's a natural disaster, and deep within, it's poverty.
Thanks for sharing, and I'm sure Santiago will get a chance to explore more of that research on adapt ed. Rocío, I think you are working on something very interesting too, accelerated education and a flexible education program. I know it's not perhaps specific to early childhood, maybe some older ones. So tell us, what are some of the good practices identified in the implementation of these programs that perhaps can be replicated or adapted so that we ensure the continuity of learning for that targeted group of young people, those who are vulnerable, those who are at risk?
Gracias. Hay
Yes, there are populations who are resilient by themselves. They live like that. We work with a population in Guatemala that is related directly. Those educational uh, programs directed to people who couldn't continue their school education. And we've seen in these programs is that we have flexible curricula. They allow to work at different schedules from modules and a structure that those who cannot have a space reserved to go to school can continue studying, which is an important right. It's centered at the student because there is accompaniment, there is assessment, spaces for facilitators to visit them home if they skip school in order to continue their education. Another thing that's important and we saw as common is this participation of the community where leaders and those who will guide the communities are part of the community and they work to give them some resources, not only financing resources, but spaces where, for example, there's no light and they buy a generator, so that they can continue learning, or we give them materials, virtual and physical materials, for them to continue. And something that's important is that they give out a permanent certification, not only for those who participate, but to those facilitators to form them in the methodology too. And something that we think is very important in this case with the Grupo Ceiba Association, with over 15 years, with these accelerated education models, is that they do this with youngsters who have been excluded from the system, youngsters who have problem with law or are in mobility, migrating or returning to our countries. So this is also with the possibility that together with the Ministry of Education, they can continue these flexible models to work with these excluded populations.
Thanks, Rocío. Like I said, I know it's not specific to the early childhood level, but if we're talking always about inclusivity in education, we cannot forget that group of young people that you mentioned, those who are in conflict with the law, and ensuring that the curriculum, as you said, is flexible so that they can continue their education. Thanks for sharing. Now, Hervé, I know your minister has already given us somewhat of a picture of what is happening in Haiti with the crises and so forth. Mais que fait Haïti, pardon, pour assurer la continuité de l'apprentissage en période de crise?
Oui, le ministre a donné beaucoup d'exemples.
The minister gave many examples in his intervention, but those with radios, for example, this is something we had before. Now, before coming from the general direction, always criticized as investigator, we're always waiting for the moment for the problem to exist to find a solution. And no, we could have mobilized these devices and tested them and be sure that when the crisis struck, we were going to have them after having, the. But after COVID, we had the need to say, okay, what do we need to do? There were formation modules who are still available. Everybody used numeric. But there was not just the COVID crisis, we had other situations before that that demanded from us to think in a technical way and find devices to ensure the continuity of school when we cannot move to school. I think that everything that was done in Haiti with this numeric system and the mobilization of utensils and devices like Zoom, Google Meets, and others are devices or systems that bring a solution because they allow us to ensure continuity. But a big problem we had is that we're testing devices when we have the need, when we have the crisis. So in Port-au-Prince, 19% of the capital is coped, is filled with gangs. Everything in college is done online, but while we are testing these devices, we are in classes. So we don't know the real results, and we're using them still in order to confront the crisis. So I criticize this as investigator, that we don't prepare. We made mistakes in Haiti to wait for a problem to start testing the tools. We could have found alternatives before that in order to have the solutions for when the problem is there. What the minister said is correct, yes, but we are not utilizing things right. Some of the things have not been tested before. We should have waited for the problems to come. We should have had solutions in beforehand. I think that's part of the problem.
I think what you're saying is really important because anticipating and preparing for that risk is an important thing. But I also hear you talking about the devices and so forth for students, as well as platforms like Zoom and so forth. One of the things I can share that we are working in the OECS is a curriculum that can also be supported offline. We have the OECS harmonized primary curriculum. Most of our officials here have been part of its development to be rolled out very soon and tested. And it's something that we are feeling very proud about. So if you want to have a conversation with anyone later on that, we would be happy to share. But we understand that while sometimes we look towards the technology to save us, we have to do it in such a way that we can also go offline. So even when I heard your minister talk about the radios, these traditional modes of continuity are also important. And even teachers I saw, as we spoke about the pandemic, walking to homes with printed out material to give to our students so that they can continue. So when we speak of innovation, it's not the modern day innovations. These things that were called innovations in the past that still work. So thanks for sharing that. Honorable Curtis King, I know you started talking about the situation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but as you face these continuous natural disasters, health risks, and so forth, can you share with us how it is your country is adapting its system to protect students and to also minimize those disruptions?
All right, thanks again. What I would say though, just building on what you were saying to the brother, it is important always for us to realize that when you're building resilience, you have to combine whatever resources you have. And a lot of times, the things that you know, the old things that you use come back to be very useful. And you combine these with the new things, the new technology. And at the end of the day, you're better for combining them. In our case, we had cases where we used what we know, and we employed also the new modern technology. If we take, for example, our challenge with regards to COVID, at the beginning, we were not prepared. I mean, who was prepared in the world for COVID-19? And so, where continuity was concerned in our schools, well, in the first place, because of the attempt to stop the spread of COVID, we had to close all of our schools. Now, you close the schools where the children are exposed to face-to-face interaction, then you have to do something when they're at home. And so we had to move to online delivery of our education. But we were not yet prepared to do so effectively. Our teachers were not effectively trained. We did not have enough devices. And some areas did not have internet connection. So you see the challenge. So we had to then go back to the old and tried and tested methods. The radio. And where radio didn't exist, we had to go to what we term school in a bag, where we produce materials, put them in packages, and take them to homes. Another critical component of that, many of our students attend school, not only for an education, but for sustenance too, in terms of meals, nutritious meals. We had to come up also with a strategy to get meals to homes where persons were living. And I must commend the World Food Program in this respect for the assistance. And so I would say in terms of the COVID-19, we had to use our creativity to ensure that we had continuity with regards to our education. However, by the time we were faced with the volcanic eruptions, we had moved to a stage where we had provided almost every single child from age 6 to about age 18 with a device. in our school, whether they were primary, secondary, or post-secondary. Also, we provided the teachers at the primary and secondary schools with devices so that, and the Ministry of Education coordinating. And by the way, we had established a task force for education continuity and recovery. And walking through that task force, we did a lot of things, but to make it easier for the teachers to deliver the education. And I remember very importantly, we moved to adopting a particular program, if I could call it that, for the delivery of the online education. And although, I must confess, it wasn't the most effective, especially in the beginning, but we had work going. And I want also to mention again something that we did, which I consider to be creative at the time. We, through collaboration, and it is also very important that we have opportunities and we exploit them for collaboration when we're in a crisis, because collaboration helps. We collaborated with the community, civil society especially, where these institutions like the churches, the medical schools, our universities, well, medical universities, offshore universities that operate within our country. We work out an arrangement with such persons and institutions for the continuity of learning through the establishment of what we call learning hubs, so that students who no longer had the use of their schools because their schools were being used as shelters could then go to these learning hubs and continue their education. And similarly, we also had established in a number of other areas strategies where it was possible for those students who were in the schools with their family as shelteries, where we created a space where they could be taught and their education continued also. Time is short, but just to say one other thing in terms of the level of collaboration. And we work with local agencies as well as regional entities. And again, I must commend some of these. OECS, GPE, very instrumental in helping us to secure devices. The World Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank. I mean, I don't like start naming because there are so many, but I don't want persons to take offense if the organization is not named. The truth is, we had great collaboration with a number of our local agencies as well as regional and international agencies. Yes, UNESCO and UNICEF. Yes?
Minister are taking notes because at some point we all face some of these. Okay, so here are some tried and proven strategies from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we move on to our final round where we look at the opportunities and not just seeing everything as bleak. So what are the opportunities do we see there here that exist to really allow us to make our system, our education system more resilient? Santiago?
There are many opportunities of improvement, as we have been mentioned, and Curtis, we have organizations who are working in this And it would be a big list to mention, but Germaine, for example, who presented yesterday, is working on Climate Smart Education System Initiative. There are many others. What I wanted to say, and if we follow with last presentation, is that what the revision requires is that we require collaboration within the state to start, not only the educational sector, also communications, health, economy, of course, following with what Javier presented. There are no intergovernmental agencies. There are many interesting ones. I was reading one of Dominica. We have people from Dominica here in the group. They developed the National Resilience Development Strategy for Dominica. It's very interesting. Felicitaciones. UNESCO and UNICEF, as you said, are making several interesting papers about resilience. We have interviewed them. Organizations of civilian society, private sector also, although sometimes we have some mistrust between public and private sector, but they can be a great help. And finally, international cooperation. Two more ideas. I hope I have time. Once, if we have interruptions of the services, they're not equal for everybody. Rural, indigenous, handicapped population who live in poverty, and all those before with a gender focus, because we know that when we have these problems, of course, house chores are not divided equally. I say all these groups that I mentioned are affected by this interruption of education in an unequal way. If I said that we needed an intersectorial focus, I also say we require an intersectional focus that considers all these groups with their complexity and interaction. If a woman who's indigenous and poor has a handicap, it's much worse than if you only have one of these circumstances. And the last thing I'd like to say is that we've talked a lot about capacity, skills, social skills, and I think pandemics and all disasters teach us that there are problems with mental health of the population, and we should not forget that. Thank you. Besides what Santiago already said, to incorporate the social emotional learning not only in the curricula but working this with the teachers is urgent and important. Also to implement robust systems of educational management by to be supported with technology that gives us the opportunity of this connectivity and also modern methods to monitor what's being done, programs of training for teachers that are robust but sensible to this diversity, support eliminating economic barriers and things that make children sometimes skip school, and enforce the intersectorial policies that we mentioned. All this, I believe, the empowerment of the communities is also an important resource that we need to take care of and establish mechanisms of financing that are sustainable and support the spaces that have these help and support programs to return to school. It's also important the creation of policies, holistic policies where the resilience is key in order not to break these cycles in all the communities that are involved, and of course also to continue with this collaboration and learning. Actualmente tenemos una reforma curricular en Haití. This reform is composed by rewriting the programs of the ministry. And the private sectors discuss to enforce the psychosocial topic in schools. We're also working on enforcing of CIGES, who works by collecting data, functioning of the governance, and also at the national budget. El gobierno actual duplicó el presupuesto con relación en lo que teníamos with what we had last year. I don't know if you all understand the phenomenon of the humanitarian problem that has allowed many teachers to leave, and the Ministry of Economy and Finances demands that to work for the deficit, for those funds to be available to hire more teachers. And as a strategy, we have worked, and this has allowed us to try the amount of teachers who departed to recover them. Because Haiti suffered a massive displacement, above all, they go to the United States, and this makes the situation complicated. So we have a set of decisions that we need to take to ensure that education is more efficient, and at the same time to ensure that the students learn more. Of course, in many efforts that we do, not only to cover deficits, but also in relationship to revisions of the sectors. We're also analyzing and seeing what didn't happen, what didn't function in the last 5 years, to better work on the sectorial plans, and they will allow us to go in a better way to have more resilience in education.
One, yes, collaboration again, because we do have quite a number of partners, development partners, who are willing to assist to ensure that we have resilience as really developing as a priority in terms of the continuity of our education. For example, the OECS and the Paul's project, for example, that focus, well, it is basically a focus on everything education, but I just want to identify the early childhood education component, which is very useful. UNICEF, through their child-friendly spaces, again, where UNICEF is putting a lot of effort into providing that sort of environment where the students can learn and learn within a socio-emotional environment that is conducive to learning. Where the disasters are concerned, we have in the Caribbean a network called the Caribbean School Safety Initiative, which is supported and financed by the CDB and CDIMA. And I know some countries are already in it. I would want to encourage more of our Caribbean countries to be part of that network. But they do a lot of work in terms of stimulating awareness of disasters and what to do and that sort of things, even at the level of the school. And again, what they do, they provide training for teachers and students so that they could make rapid response in times of crisis. the World Food Program, and there's a grouping coming out of the World Food Program called the School Meals Coalition, where, I mean, you have networking among countries with regards to the provision of nutritious meals to students. And again, that is an area that we can seek and get help. And, well, not just seek and get help, because I believe that we also have something to share. So it's really networking where it's mutually beneficial. CDB, I mentioned already, BNTF, again, because BNTF, that body assists in building early childhood centers, certainly across the Caribbean. So these are things that, and these are organizations that we can approach and build that sort of collaboration that would benefit us in the long run.
Thanks so much. Panelists, I thank you for sharing your experiences. Everything you've said is extremely important. I'm certain you have piqued the interest of our audience, and they may be reaching out to you at some point. So do elaborate on some of the things you have shared here, share your experiences. That's what this whole experience is about. So thank you so much for joining me here. And I would like to thank the organizers for making sure that this topic was also placed on the agenda, the idea of resilience from the very early years, because these are truly our realities. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks to all our panelists for everything that was shared. And to close this block of resilience, I'd like to invite Merphilus James, President, National President of the Council of Persons with Handicap from St. Lucia, to share some reflections and keynotes on the challenges of education in handicap and resilience. An applause, please.
Distinguished guests, ladies, gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Merphilus James, President of the National Council for Persons with Disabilities in St. Lucia. And coming from this brilliant discussion and all the wonderful presentations which have come thus far, I want to join in all in expressing how much of a powerful forum this is. As a person with a disability myself, we represent the largest minority group in the world. The United Nations tells us that over 1 billion people in this world, 15% of the global population, are persons with disabilities. In the region, a prominent World Bank study tells us that we have about 85 million people with disabilities in Latin America and the Caribbean, which amounts to about 15% of our population here. It is incontrovertible that education remains one of the most powerful avenues by which people with disabilities and any poor group can rise above to economic freedom and self-sufficiency. But too many times we are bombarded with the statistics, with the reality that people with disabilities, already being among the poorest of the population, lack access to education, healthcare, and many facets of society. So it is very important in our work and in these deliberations that we strive to ensure full inclusion. Now bear with me here, please, because whenever we see the word inclusion as people with disabilities, it jumps out at us. Because over the years, for the lack of a better phrase, this word has become diluted. Because inclusion originally in advocacy related specifically to the rights of people with disabilities to access education on an equal basis with others. We welcome the fact that the term has evolved to welcome many other groups, minorities and marginalized groups. But it is extremely important to us to ensure that the rights of people with disabilities are upheld. It's very simple to understand. You may be part of a minority group, but you may not have a physical or an intellectual impairment. Disability compounds this situation. One of the extremely important things about forums like this, where we have you distinguished experts and specialists, and with the talk about curriculum, I want to share a very scary part of the prominent World Bank study in the region which happened in 2021 with you. And listen to this well, because there is a very subtle yet powerful barrier here we must not underestimate. This study said that in an assessment of the images of 5,000 images in textbooks, only 1.6 depicted people with disabilities. Now, this is extremely crucial because children learn who is important, who matters, who forms part of society by what they see, by what is presented to them. And we are, in a sense, reinforcing discrimination, isolation, if our curriculum is not demonstrating that people with disabilities are a normal part of society, that disability is a everyday experience in life. So we call upon our leaders here to bear in mind that curriculum reform is extremely important. We need to have audits of our curriculum to truly ensure that when public policy preaches inclusion and equality, that our curriculum also promotes that ideal. Clearly understood? Very good. Now, in terms of resilience here, we like to add to the definition, because we know resilience is not just about being able to bounce back. We want to know we bounce back better or we bounce back to a higher standard. For many of our people with disabilities who are excluded from education, it's not just curriculum. It's not just inadequate teaching or resources. It's also the built environment, the lack of the physical infrastructure, or the absence of the assistive devices and technologies. So there is a lot of reform which needs to take place in our education system. So I'm very thrilled that we have ministers of government present with us. We have high-level public officials who are in a powerful place to effect this change. In our work, data is so important. We cannot approach any donor for money if we do not present credible, verifiable data. And there is a very powerful study which was conducted by the International Labour Organization, which showed that nations forfeit as much as 3 to 7% of their GDP when people with disabilities are excluded from the labor force. This is large and it is measurable. So it makes good economic sense for us to ensure that we work towards the full employment of people with disabilities who are willing and able to work. Another study demonstrated that in the region, where about 23% of people with disabilities complete high school education, 53% of people without disabilities do. This is a major gap, and there is data showing this. But it will not surprise you to know that these problems didn't start in high school. They go back to the core of the issue we're discussing here, early childhood education. And this is core to the work that we do. So as the Honorable King from St. Vincent lamented in his presentations on the difficulty in identifying learning issues at an early age, we must invest the necessary resources to these core issues. So as a disability rights leader, I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank SUMA. I want to thank the OECS and GPE and all of you, experts and officials, for creating this platform. And I want to throw out a challenge, or rather an invitation, that if forums like this are a microcosm of society, we have an opportunity here to ensure that at least 15% of participants here are people with disabilities. Our minister has the power to ensure that at least one person in his delegation is a person with a disability. In our global disability movement, we have the mantra, nothing about us without us. Too many times discussions were taking place and things being shoved down our throat of this is what is good for you people. We're the ones with the doctorates and the degrees, and we're telling you this is what is good for you. Well, no, we've come a long way. We have a right to have a seat at the tables of decision making to add our own voice. Thank you, ladies, gentlemen.
Thank you, Merphilus, for sharing this testimony with us and to visibilize these gaps that we confront, that people with disabilities confront. I think this is a very important topic from our educational systems to visibilize this problem. So we've spoken about inclusion, continuity, collaboration, adaptation, many things that we work for in as part of resilience. So a big applause for this space. And due to rain, the coffee came to us, to our tables. So I hope you can enjoy this coffee break. Meanwhile, we will continue with our next and last block of the day, retaking the activity that we had with the ecosystem of projects from KIX LAC, the first block. Now we will do the second one. So I call Kata. We'll give you some 15 minutes to stretch a little bit, perhaps get up and walk. Please stand up. We can do some yoga if you want to. You can stretch. We will give you some 10 minutes if you want to walk around the hall to wake up a little bit, and then we'll